Some of you had obviously done some research on it, so had a fairly stock response, but others gave more nuanced, thoughtful, and personal responses. I should note that the reason for recording today is so that we can keep a record of the meeting. You've obviously consented to it if you're still in the meeting. But when we asked about your 20-minute neighbourhood, what your concept of it was, the most common words that you used were around daily needs, around services and amenities, and around means of transportation, primarily walking and using public transport. So these were the most common words that appeared in everyone's definitions. There was an interesting sort of definition around it was a 10-minute neighbourhood for all. There was also there was a little bit of disparity between what a 20-minute neighbourhood, whether or not it was for your daily needs or weekly needs. But there were quite a lot of notable comments about it was the majority of your needs and for the majority of people, which maybe reflects people recognising that not all our daily or weekly needs can be delivered within 10 minutes of the house, because there are times in our lives that there may be very specific things that we have need that can't be nearly 10 minutes away. When it came to what those needs were, most people just talked about essential or daily, but then some people began expanding upon that and identifying what they were. I tell you, we're a nation of shoppers. Shopping was the main thing that everyone said was a daily need, followed by education. So that the order that I've put them in there: shops, education, health, parks, leisure, work, community centre. These were the majority. When people talked about what those needs were, these were the ones that came up most frequently, but with certainly shops, education and health being the ones that were most notable. There's a distinct debate occurring, not just in the responses that we got around the length of time that we're talking about. Some people were very strict on it's 10 minutes out and 10 minutes back. That's it, it has to be. Whereas some people were a bit more open about what that could mean. I've actually copied what someone has said there, that the length of time is somewhat arbitrary, exclusionary, and there are a number of different variations across different geographies, which taps into another question that does come up around what it means for non-urban Scotland. Primarily, what does it mean for rural Scotland? Can everyone be in a 20-minute neighbourhood in rural Scotland? I think we do kind of know the answer to that. But I would also offer the respondents who were strict on time were primarily men, and the ones who were more open on the timing were women, or people who actually were not based in a highly urbanised part of Scotland. What did come up, I'm pleased to see, is the quality of route and service being referred to. So while people were acknowledging that the time was important, it's the quality of experience on that travel that is important. But only one person mentioned the affordability of housing or food. So housing was something that people picked up on as something that is obviously necessary in a 20-minute neighbourhood, but the affordability of it was only picked up by one. And as I said, the rural Scotland question was one that came up. What I've done on this slide is just look at a couple of definitions two definitions that I liked, that I've drawn out because I find them quite interesting, particularly because I was aware there's a debate that I could see happening on Twitter around the restrictions of a 20-minute neighbourhood, as if you're forced to live in a ghetto where you can't escape from it and that everything in your life must take place in that. And talking to some people who grew up in rural parts of Scotland, they were really glad that they got to travel to school and glad to get out of their community and see more people. So it was the fact that it's a concept that allows local living. And also I thought it was interesting that someone's picked up on that their emotional and digital needs, because obviously digital in this concept is something that maybe not everyone's thinking about, the digital component of a 20-minute neighbourhood, and that there are certain things that we can now access digitally that we may have previously accessed physically, and there are obviously issues around that, around digital exclusion. But I thought that was an interesting one. And the final one is one that I have synthesized from all of the ones that have come into us. And I thought the simplest way of me describing what everyone else has said is it's a neighbourhood in which it's desirable to access daily needs by active travel. or public transport. And when I say desirable, that you would want to, as an individual, move around your space, either walking, cycling, etc., or using public transport. And at the bottom there, I put probably what's familiar to a lot of people is a diagram showing what the features of a 20-minute neighbourhood are, which is taken from, I think, our colleagues in Melbourne, which it tries to capture most of what I think people have identified as essential. Challenges: car-centric nature of our existing environment was the main thing. Everybody mentioned cars and the fact that we designed for cars and that we're continuing to design for autonomous travel, basically, private travel, combined with the centralisation of services and retail. And so whether or not that's for efficiencies or due to funding cuts, the fact that we've centralised a lot over the past 15 to 20 years is also one that is seen as a challenge, and one that people see continuing, I suppose, tied in with some of the funding cuts and funding restrictions that we're seeing playing out in some local authorities. The clarity of definition is something that people are seeking. Comes back to the timing debate. People are concerned about inequalities being exacerbated. Already, SURF are being contacted by communities who are looking at development being created near them and saying, well, this isn't a 20-minute neighbourhood, what are you going to do about it? Now, with SURF, we can say we can do nothing about that. But what I would note is it's privileged communities that are coming to us to tell us that some bad things are happening that aren't 20-minute neighbourhoods. They see that the concept, I would say, is quite easily understood by the public, by lay people. But the people that are grasping it most quickly are people who I would describe as already empowered. And you've picked that up as members of this network. People are looking for an enforceable policy. So must we have 20-minute neighbourhoods, or should we have 20-minute neighbourhoods? And long-term political support. If you do any other reading around this, a lot of the discussion around 20-minute neighbourhoods is around the fact that it needs long-term political commitment. Public transport policy, behaviour change, both of decision makers and the public. And one person asked, is it attractive to the market? It's not something that the public sector can deliver on its own, so it needs to be attractive to the market. From the network, you are looking for a greater understanding of the concept. You are looking for case studies and best practice, which is good because this is what we have agreed to deliver, what the baseline is, up-to-date information and policy, connecting with collaborators to deliver it, but also with certain national funders, and advocacy for the 20-minute neighbourhoods and for what is defined as essential. So advocacy falls into two categories. There are people who have joined the network because they want to advocate for a particular niche area. I'll mention no names, but people want to advocate to make sure that community gardens or allotments are part of a 20-minute neighbourhood, or museums, galleries, heritage, that they are seen as a distinct part of it. So there are some people who want to advocate for their area of expertise. But there's a general recognition that there is a need for advocacy around the concept of the 20-minute neighbourhood. I would say to make sure that it is a strong policy point at national level, national and local level, and to ensure that there is political engagement or political support for the concept, and that there's continued political support. Arguably, if the policy is in National Planning Framework 4, that gives us 10 years of it being a national policy. They maybe had town centres as a national policy for some time. How successful has that been? So we need to make sure that the policy has long-term support and that it's one that's rigorous. We also asked another couple of questions. We asked for examples of interventions that people had seen that had delivered 20-minute neighbourhoods. And what I would say about that is everyone said Portland, Melbourne and Paris, funnily enough, because they are the commonly used case studies. Only one person said they could name lots, and that was Nick Wright, who some of you may know, and Nick Wright's done a lot of work across communities. And some people picked up on some of the spaces for people infrastructure that's been put in over the last year in towns and cities across Scotland. The majority of people said no, they couldn't think of an intervention, which I was quite intrigued by, because I think sometimes there may be things that are interventions that we're not picking up on that are actually delivering 20-minute neighbourhoods. So that's something for us, for SURF to think about as to what we provide you next, is making sure that we provide case studies that people can see do translate as 20 neighbourhood in activity that is already happening. So these are the main areas that, the main responses that you have shared with us. And I think in light of that, we began organising today, not in direct response to your responses to those questions, but with some idea of what we could expect from your responses. And so what we thought would be helpful today is to look at the 20-minute neighbourhood concept at kind of 3 levels. So look at some of the background research that has been done for Scotland, to look at one local authority that has come out with a strategy. I will confess now, I'm from Edinburgh. I always try not to use Edinburgh as examples of things because I don't think Edinburgh is totally translatable to the whole of Scotland. But the City of Edinburgh Council were quite fast out the traps with publishing a 20-minute neighbourhood strategy. So we've invited Daisy Narayanan to talk on that. But what I was also interested at was looking at what it would look like from a community perspective, because it's about individual experience of a 20-minute neighbourhood, and a lot of the dialogue around it is how communities use their places. And as a result of that, Nick Wright have already referred to, drew our attention to the fact that the Kinning Park complex are running a local place plan, the development of a local place plan, and 20-minute neighbourhoods are fundamental to that. And we thought it would be really great to hear from Nikki Batterson about why they had done that and how they were going about gathering the information about how their community understands the 20-minute neighbourhood and what they would like to see change in the area around which Kinning Park is based, the community it supports. So that's where we are with SURF. From a personal perspective, 20-minute neighbourhood, as others have said, is a deceptively simple concept. So I think the 20-minute neighbourhood captures people's attentions, as I've said, lay people kind of grasp that in a way that is better than the place principle, which, however, the place principle is a good thing. It isn't necessarily understood fully by non-urbanist types. But the 20-minute neighbourhood encapsulates the place principle, the place standard, and local place plans. So I would hope that this, as a policy thing, has traction that we can see altering practice in our neighbourhoods. So that's where we stand as a network just now. We have 3 speakers, the 3 speakers lined up. Rebecca Dillon Robinson from Ramboll will be our first speaker. And after we've heard from our 3 speakers, we'll then open it up and you can ask questions of the speakers or any other questions that are burning for us to take up after 11 o'clock this morning. So I'll now hand over to Rebecca Dillon Robinson, who will discuss the Ramboll research.
Thank you very much. Hi everybody, I am just going to share my screen. There we go. Great. Thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, I'm Rebecca Dillon Robinson. I am an urban planner at Ramboll, and I'm a co-author on research for climate exchange, which was looking at 20-minute neighbourhoods in a Scottish context, and that was published in March this year. So I'm just going to talk you through a bit of the research which looked at the whole of Scotland and the applicability of this concept. So just really briefly, who are Ramboll? So we're an independent engineering, architecture and consultancy company. We're Nordic heritage, but we're present in 35 countries, and we're foundation owned as well, which just means that we're able to invest in lots of research and really be able to look at developing livable places for the places that we all work in. And I think that's really key to where we come from as well, is that human experience and needs are where we start from on all of our projects, and we look at from strategy through to execution. And we're an integrated company, and we also offer independent guidance. So that's just a little bit of who we are, and we did this piece of research. So our brief we were given this definition of the Scottish Government definition. So we started this research back in November last year. So the definition in the Scottish Government was at that time where people can meet their needs within a 20-minute walk from their house, enabling people to live better, healthier lives and support our net zero ambitions. So I know that since then, as Ewan said, we're kind of exploring what the nuance was, but nuance definition was, but this is where we were starting from, and a bit of background to why we were commissioned to do the research. So we were commissioned to support Scotland's response to the climate emergency, and particularly this research was to support policies under, at that time, the just recently published update to the climate change plan, as part of the programme for government, the town centre action plan, and as research to support the place principle and the place standard. So our research was intended as initial research intended to move the discussion forward, which I think that it's done. So it was published in March, and I know that we've been involved in a lot of presentations and webinars since then, and hoping to kind of give some baseline information to support the discussion and to move the discussion forward as well. So the aims of the 20-minute neighbourhood and particular focus of this research, one of the stakeholders in the research was Transport Scotland, and then the other was Public Health Scotland as well as the Scottish Government. So we were particularly looking at how do we tackle the climate emergency by reducing car dependency, and that the 20-minute neighbourhood can be a tool for this. Transport Scotland and the Scottish Government have an aim of reducing car journeys by 20%, and they see the 20-minute neighbourhood as kind of a key component of that, and being able to meet that target. We also looked at tackling inequality, or this is one of the aims of 20-minute neighbourhood that was outlined by our stakeholders, tackling inequality by improving access to services and service provision, and that's particularly from a public health point of view. Also, that the 20-minute neighbourhood could offer a coordinated approach to a broad range of policy interventions. So I guess this is a discussion, is that when we were doing the research, the 20-minute neighbourhood was seen as a concept that could be used to drive forward policies rather than as a policy, which I know is a slight nuance, but that was how we kind of framed the 20-minute neighbourhood, that it could bring together a lot of policies and be a way to bring together a lot of different disparate people working in different areas. Another public health aim that we were looking at, improving public health by facilitating everyday active travel to access goods and services. So that's really our kind of starting point for looking at the research and the baselining. So we started off by looking at the definition and really trying to break down, okay, if we're going to do a baseline study, you know, how do we break down that a place performs as a 20-minute neighbourhood? And we broke this down into three key things. So one, that there are features and infrastructure. So there are shops, there are cycle networks, and I'll go into what we define as those features in a little bit. But then also that there's a quality of services and infrastructure. So you have the feature, but there also needs to be a quality aspect to that. So those are the things that need to be present. But then ultimately you need engagement and behaviour change to get the place to perform as a 20-minute neighbourhood, i.e. that people walk and cycle, use their local services, are engaged in their community. So we saw those three key things. And then I've outlined the kind of two at the bottom, is those are the definition that we built that we could look to study in this research. The kind of missing piece for us was that, and being able to study the engagement and behaviour change to see if a place actually performs as a 20-minute neighbourhood. So how did we get to our definition? So the relationship to the place principle, there's been a lot of work in the place principle, the place standard tool, place and wellbeing outcomes, which has actually already defined a lot of the factors, and this is built specific to a Scottish context as well. So, you know, we're looking in a Scottish context, not just a definition that could be applied anywhere. And so we built our definition based on the categories already defined in the place principle, and these are already tied to place and wellbeing outcomes as well. So that's tied to public health outcomes, as well. So our definition ended up with these 14 categories, and they are under the 5 themes of stewardship, civic, spaces, resources, and movement. And I think Ewan already covered a lot of these categories, but I think our definition is quite expansive and quite holistic. So it covers things like feeling safe, to then things you might expect, so public transport. We also cover traffic and parking in our definition, because actually a well-designed place where people can park their cars and move around, so that then they can leave their car and then move around, is really important actively. We also look at the idea of influence and sense of control, so that idea of kind of being brought into your place, into your neighbourhood. The idea of care and maintenance, I think that falls under quite a lot of the quality that people are talking about. And then things like facilities and services, which would cover healthcare, which would cover shops. So we looked at this as quite, an expansive definition based on the place principle, and the idea being that potentially communities could tailor this wider definition and add a weighting to each of the categories to define what was important to them. In our research, we didn't add a weighting to any of these categories. We kept them exactly kind of equal in the way that we measured a 20-minute neighbourhood. But I'll go through that. And then sort of looked at what are the outcomes then. We're looking at, this can tackle climate action, looking at improving the local economy, decrease health inequalities, and improve livability and quality of life. So what we did is we took this definition and we looked at all of the categories, and we assigned them quantity and quality features, which is this table in the middle here. And we added the quantity score to the quality score to give each of these categories a score. And then we added those categories together to look at whether places in Scotland met our definition of a 20-minute neighbourhood. And what we also did is we took the centre of every output area in Scotland, and then we measured an 800-metre circle from that centre point, and we asked the mapping tool what features are accessible from that centre point for people to access within 800 metres. And I guess also to say what data we used. So we were able to assign a lot of the features. So for example, is there a shop? Is there a cycle network? Is there public transport? Is there a hospital? Is there a school? We were able to do that on a national level. What we weren't able to do on a national level is a lot of those quality features exactly to the presence of a cycle network. So we weren't able to say what is the quality of this cycle network on this initial piece of baselining. So what we did is we used proxy indicators. So we used indices of multiple deprivation, for example, and we would look at access to green space in that area, for example, under our natural space. So we could say there's a park for the quantity indicator, and then for the quality, we looked at one of those kind of proxy indicators. But we think that it gave us, a really good overview of the whole of Scotland, and whether places in Scotland have the capacity to be 20-minute neighbourhoods was our kind of question. So what are our key findings? And you can see that below I've got a zoomed map of Glasgow and Edinburgh below, and the dark purple shows the neighbourhoods that are closest to meeting our definition. And we had in Edinburgh we had Tollcross scoring at 99% on our definition. So that was kind of pretty high on our definition. And so we found that communities across Scotland, many of them have the required services and infrastructure to allow them to be 20-minute neighbourhoods. And this is the case across both urban and rural settlement areas. And I think I've kind of got to caveat that with, when we were looking at rural areas, that's kind of rural centres, so not every part of rural Scotland, but really those rural towns. And for example, Pitlochry scored really highly on our definition, as did Braemar as well, scored really highly on our definition. So I think when we're talking about rural areas, we're talking about those clustering areas that scored really highly. And as you can see kind of on the map below, some of those areas without that population density are not going to score highly or be able to be 20-minute neighbourhoods, because they don't have that kind of central point. So just kind of I think caveating that is important. But our assessment, as I said, doesn't allow for the conclusion that the required quality of services or infrastructure is in place, and we'd hope that people could use this tool on a more local level. And it doesn't conclude that these places are performing as 20-minute neighbourhoods. So that's the baseline. And then as also part of this research, we looked at a benchmarking exercise. So we looked at these locations, and so we looked at Scottish examples, European and international examples. And what did we learn? So we learned that there are multiple policies worldwide, but there's limited delivery, and most of the policies are not national. So we think Scotland is one of the first places in the world that's doing this on a national level rather than as a city. So the critical success factor in the delivery of 20-minute neighbourhoods is public participation. That's really key. And public participation can be done in many different ways, but one of them is participatory budgeting, is one form that people use for public participation. Interventions or policies put in place, in every case, are bespoke to that place. There's no one-size-fits-all approach that could be replicated in Scotland. A people-centred approach is key to behaviour change, so that was that kind of key aspect that we found as well. And the place principle is fundamental to the delivery of this concept, and that's what we found across our examples. So some specific measures that we found, so this is Melbourne in the picture behind. So neighbourhood activity centres, that idea of density of services, of activity in one place. Schools as community centres or hubs, so opening those after hours. Prioritising transport interventions for communities. So I know there's been a lot of discussion about buses in Scotland, buses potentially serving rural communities. Could we look at how that's working or not working at the moment? Active ground floors being really important, dual shop fronts, and virtual services as well, such as outpatient healthcare. So yeah, lots of different lessons learned from our global benchmarking. And then we were asked to set some ambitions, and we set 5 ambitions. We think that Scotland has the opportunity to be a global leader in delivering this concept across the country, showing it's feasible in both urban and rural locations. We think that every neighbourhood in Scotland should be facilitated to be a 20-minute neighbourhood, that communities should be empowered to make changes in their neighbourhoods. So I think that's about the participation being really important, and to meet their daily needs in a fair and equitable way. And that this concept should enable people to travel actively, and that is in support of their health and well-being, but also without access being limited to them by the cost of transport. And I know that we've talked about public transport, but I think for us, the real focus needs to be on active travel because of that limiting factor of the cost of public transport. And I know, I'm sure we'll have some discussion about that. And as I said, the 20-minute neighbourhood we see as a concept that should be the ambition that pulls together all other relevant policies. And then finally, we set some recommendations. So use the development of the 4th National Planning Framework to rationalise and coordinate all of the policy landscape to support the delivery of this concept. And a greater emphasis should be put on reducing private car journeys, and high quality active travel infrastructure can be used to reallocate space. That could be one tool. We think that we should define this concept framework funding at a national level. I think Ewan talked about this before as well, that it's important this national framework, but then local delivery, ambition and participation. To do that, that obviously different communities will need to be supported in different ways. So then we suggested that we need to look at demonstration areas, looking at how this can be done in different places, learning for best practice, and looking at levels of deprivation and how those communities in different places can be best supported to deliver a 20-minute neighbourhood. We also talked about the importance of a national survey on walkable distances and visual perceptions so that we can nuance this 20-minute neighbourhoods concept. So are people willing to walk for 5 minutes to certain services, 20 minutes to certain services? Is that different in rural places? Is that different in urban places? And actually, we think that by asking the public and doing a national survey on that, we'd have a better understanding of that. Mapping to establish a detailed baseline, so building on the mapping work that we've done, and also reviewing whether the place principle is being operationalized, because we think that that's the key tool to bring the 20-minute neighbourhoods into place. Sorry, I've gone a bit over time, but I whizzed through that last bit, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. That was a really excellent overview, and Rebecca's research is available online, and we'll be sending out links to that afterwards, and we'll make sure that it's all on our webpage that's relevant to the 20-minute neighbourhoods, as well as some of the links. There's an interactive map where you can find out how many bus stops are near your house, or hospitals. So there are all sorts of facilities that you can use already out there for understanding what's within 800 metres of your house. But we'll share with you all after this meeting. We'll move swiftly on to look into what this could mean at a local authority level. So I'm going to introduce Daisy Narayanan to introduce the City of Edinburgh Council's 20-minute neighbourhood strategy. Over to you, Daisy.
Thank you, Ewan. Thank you. It's brilliant to be here. I love the idea of a network where we can share and we can inspire each other and learn from each other. So it's just wonderful to be here and have the opportunity to talk about what we're doing in Edinburgh as well. So thank you, Ewan, and everyone for inviting me to speak today. I just want to give a little bit of a caveat. Sorry, it's summer holidays. My kids are here. Netflix is on. So if my internet's a bit dodgy and if it kind of crashes, I'll come back on. It's happened in the past for a couple of webinars. So I think all of us have learned over the past 18 months how this works. So just wanted to say that before I kick off. As Ian said, I'm Daisy Narayanan. I am I lead on mobility and placemaking in the City of Edinburgh Council. And I'm quite new to my role. It's been 2.5 months, just over 2 months since I started with the City of Edinburgh Council, and I'm still getting my head around my remit and trying to understand the different ways of how public sector works and how immediate the changes can be when you work with local government, and how exciting, what a privilege it is to work in a local authority, helping to shape what the city could look like and function like over the next few years. So I'm genuinely very excited about this. I'm very excited about the fact that my remit includes the City Mobility Plan, the City Centre Transformation Project, and the 20-minute neighbourhoods in a nutshell. So right from the regional kind of discussions around what transport looks like to the granular discussions, building on what you've heard from you and Rebecca already around neighborhoods and our streets, and what and more importantly people, and how people experience our streets and our spaces. So it's a hugely exciting role, and the reason I mention it is because it's a new role that's been created by the City of Edinburgh Council, and it's one that bridges transport and planning. It's for a long time, I think many of us in this room and across many sectors have talked about how we need to work, planning and transport need to work closer together. So, in order to enable better places and better lives for people. So it's really exciting to see that the City of Edinburgh Council has created this role. Obviously, very excited that I've got it. And one of the things that I think exemplifies how we can create better neighborhoods and better lives for people is that the 20-minute neighborhood, where you have to bridge planning, transport, economic development, social justice, everything that comes together to make places better. In a sense, that my role that has been created by the council is that bridging role that hopes to join the dots. So as you mentioned as well, the 20-minute neighborhood concept is not a new one. It's been discussed for decades now, right from Jane Jacobs in the 1960s talked about local living, even before that. And in urbanist circles or design circles, it's not something new. But I think over the past year and a half, through COVID, through lockdown, people have started to understand a bit more around what local living could be, and how we can capture and harness some of that learning and that discussion and take it forward into shaping what the future looks like. It's such an easy concept to understand. I think it's an easy concept to kind of put your to put various thoughts and ideas onto. But I think for me, what's really exciting now is making that concept into reality, as we're doing in Edinburgh, we're starting to do in Edinburgh. And it also then highlights the complexities that are, that go with delivering what is quite a simple concept. And that, to me, is another reason why this network is so brilliant, that we can come together and discuss some of these complexities in a space where we can be. I mean, obviously, you can talk about things in a way that really brings together different expertise and ideas from different places. Before I kick off my slides, I just wanted to say as well that, when I joined the council, that was the end of May, and the work around the 20-minute strategy had already been going on for a long time. So they'd already been building on the discussions within Scottish Government and elsewhere. Around the middle of June is when the strategy went to committee and it got signed off. And we hear people say, if you want to show your commitment, show us your budget. And I think the council has put money where its mouth is, and there is £500,000 that the council is committed to make, to start to create this concept and make it into reality. So just wanted to say that it's really great to be here, where there is real commitment to make this happen and to build on the work that Rebecca and you both touched upon. Let me share my screen. Hopefully it should be all right. Can you see that?
Yes,
I want to caveat this as well. Oh, super. Just want to caveat this as well by saying that, it's very early thinking. We're still starting to look at what the 20-minute neighborhood looks like in reality. So, just to say that I'd be grateful if these slides weren't shared outside, but just because it's very early thinking. I don't want any hairs running at this stage. A lot of it has already been discussed in various committees and stuff, but just wanted to say that. So what is 20-minute neighborhood in Edinburgh? In Edinburgh, the definition, so to speak, that we're talking about is 10 minutes there and back. So it's, in terms of the definition, just picking up your point, Ewan, around what people were saying, what 20-minute neighborhood means to them. However, it's very, we have been very clear in saying that it's not a one size fits all. There is no 10-minute walk there and back means very, very different things to different people, whether it's my 10-year-old boy, or whether it's for me or someone in a wheelchair, or for different age groups, different genders. The experience of a place is different, as we all know. So there is a kind of a definition around what 20 minutes means, but we are quite clear that we don't want to get hung up on the 20 minutes. It's about living well locally, and it's about enabling that local living to be as good as it can be. So a few things that the strategy sets out. So in Edinburgh, our 20-minute neighbourhood, where most of daily needs can be met within 20 minutes by foot, bike, public transport, again, mirroring what Rebecca said and what Scottish Government are talking about. We're talking about building new models of shared service delivery with partners. So working with organizations such as EVOC, starting to see how this is not something that the council can deliver on its own, acknowledging that very early on. This isn't something where the council says, this is what we want you to do as a community. This is very much about us working with communities, with people who are already embedded within the systems, and seeing what best, sorry, apologies if you can hear my kids running in the background. A little bit about how we work internally as a council, using our assets, making sure that we can deliver more services, creating our own estates as being as fit for purpose and sustainable as it can be. Taking a strategic approach, again, internally to the location of how the council pulls its services together, and supporting a growing city in a sustainable manner. City of Edinburgh Council has 3 pillars to its business plan: its well-being, its sustainability, and reducing poverty. So it's the 20-minute neighbourhood touches upon all of those. So the aims are set out in the strategy as well. And again, if you wouldn't mind sharing the strategy for those who haven't seen it, it's about, again, as I said, it's a mix of external facing aims, and some of it is internal to the council, as it has to be, when you're working within this framework. So right from sustainable, safe, resilient neighborhoods, changing the ways of working with services and partners, supporting local economies and businesses, enhanced voluntary sector facilities, services networks, placemaking, really important, making sure there are towns and local centres. It's not just about the city centre, 9 local centres, town centres within Edinburgh. More local working, building on the post-COVID recovery, working with the recovery teams to see how we can ensure that that is embedded and can be as positive as it can be. And as again, picking up on what Rebecca said, sustainable onward travel, making sure that focus on transport is on sustainable transport, again, leading straight back up to our 2030 the net zero ambitions that the council has set out. Again, you can see that, very clear that this is not something that the council can do on its own, and starting to pick up on the different discussions that have already been happening, empowered communities, wealth building on the Christie Commission recommendations, looking at what the anchor organizations are, right from the NHS, what does this mean for health and social care, collaboration within services internally, no wrong door, who are our third sector partners, what new partnerships do we need to create to start to deliver this, how do we make those conversations real with communities, where does the council take the lead, and where do we step back and let the communities have that discussion and come to us and say, this is what we need. So a lot of, very, very clear from the council at the outset that this has to be a partnership. This cannot be the council saying, this is what 20-minute neighborhoods means for you. This is, what does it mean for us as a collaborative? So some of the things that the strategy then set out, the council teams did a mapping exercise in terms of what was, where our assets were, where the new school investments were going, where were the big capital projects, where's investment going in within the council. The West Hills, for example, there's community-led place planning work already going on as part of the wider regeneration work. Working with Edinburgh Health and Social Care Partnership, that's looking at loneliness and isolation, building new networks of support and well-being. So picking up what is happening across the council and starting to join the dots and starting to look at some of what we are doing with that 20-minute neighbourhood lens, building on, again, looking at what's being done by the Scottish Government, the frameworks that are being set up, and using that lens to see how we can do things better internally. So these are some of the emerging thoughts that we have within the council. So, one of the things that we've seen with 20-minute neighborhoods is that, as I said, it's an easy concept to grasp, but it means very, very different things to different people. You ask 5 people in a room, what does a 20-minute neighborhood mean to you? You'll get 6 different answers. So, it's about kind of, I was very keen to focus in on what it is that we are delivering. There's funding set aside. We needed to go beyond policy for the council into tangible outcomes. So, at the end of March this year, we can point to a few things and say, this is what a 20-minute neighborhood funding delivers. So we're starting to look at perhaps 3 streams of work. One is, where there is already a huge amount of regeneration going on. So Wester Hales, for example. So making sure that regeneration is completely built around the 20-minute neighborhood concept. So the conversations that happen with communities, right from engagement, the surveys that we talked about, to the bigger picture capital investment within that, that all singing, all dancing in a way, making sure that big regeneration work in that area is 20-minute neighborhood lens on it. And then the second strand of work is looking at where we have, for example, building a new school, or, there's discussions around assets in Portobello, for example, the town hall. So putting a 20-minute neighborhood lens on that as well, joining the dots, slightly more light touch, but making sure that this is, that this is part of the conversation narrative over there. And the third strand is looking at the town centers and seeing if the town centers can become the anchor points for 20-minute neighborhoods. And that's more design focused, designing a public realm, looking at the different work that's already happening in Craig Miller, for example, Costoffen, and again, bringing the 20-minute neighborhood lens onto that. And then I'll stop with this slide, which kind of starts to detail out a little bit more around what that means, and how each of these individual lines that we've picked up actually is within its own context will mean different things. So I'll summarize, I suppose, by picking up your point around, what does this mean for urban and rural? There's also urban, suburban, rural. There's also within the urban context and within the suburban context, there will be different responses to what is required, because each community will have its own aspirations for what they think the 20-minute neighborhood is. A couple of points just to end. Things that we've been doing, we've been working with EVOC and NHS, starting to map out where the different assets are in Edinburgh, so university assets, and starting to see how we can make sure that more deprived areas, for example, we are able to, the investment can be prioritized based on the greatest need. The second thing we're doing is starting to create this kind of forum where you can come in and try things out. So gender, for example, seeing how women feel. There's a university project that someone's leading where she's approached us to say, can I work with communities there to have a little mapping tool for how safe women feel, how welcome they feel in these spaces. And again, this 20-minute neighborhood allows us to do that. And finally, working with Scottish Government, making sure that we are aligned to what the Scottish Government thinking is. So again, in terms of funding or whatever opportunities come forward, we're able to then align ourselves to them. So I'll stop sharing now. Hopefully this has given you a little snapshot of what's happening in Edinburgh. It is hugely exciting, very heavily, I don't want to say caveated by I'm quite new to the role. I'm very excited about taking this forward. I need all the help I can get. My team needs help. The council would like to make sure that we are sharing and learning from others as well. And next time you say, in a year's time, you can say Paris, Melbourne, Portland, and Edinburgh.
Thank you very much, Daisy. And I think, Daisy, actually, some of what you said there, I'm picking up on what Daisy said. This is not a concept that's for one bit of local authority. I mean, I suppose in some ways, some people are looking at it as a planning policy issue, but it's not a planning issue. It's a responsibility for everything. And Daisy, I think and in the conversations you and I have had, your role is cross-directorate, cross-silo, and I suppose we've all been talking for decades about breaking down silos, but this particular concept is possibly helping us lever the crack to make sure that we do kind of do more cross-silo working, particularly in public agencies. So thank you very much, Daisy. We'll move on now to look at it from a community perspective, and Nikki Patterson, and I don't know if Frankie's going to join in as well, but Nikki and Frankie are going to tell us about the Kinning Park complex approach to 20-minute neighbourhoods within a local place plan. So over to you, Nikki and Frankie.
Yep, good morning. Just first of all, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, right, excellent. I'm just going to share my screen just now. A couple of caveats before we start, or a couple of disclaimers, I suppose. Frankie and I have been on, I'm still on holiday. Frankie just returned to work yesterday, so this presentation was kind of thrown together, so it's not going to be as fancy with the graphics as Rebecca's and Daisy's excellent presentations. And second of all, Frankie and I are not planners, we are community learning and development workers, and so if some of the things we say might seem a little incoherent in terms of technical jargon and so on, but so bear with us on that, but we do know other stuff when it comes to CLD work, so take you along. Frankie and I are going to share this presentation. What we're going to talk about is just to give some context and overview of the area that we're working in just south of the river in Glasgow. Give an overview of our approach to the local place plan that we are facilitating, and then to talk a little bit about why we chose the 20-minute neighbourhood concept, why we chose to operationalise that, and a little bit about how we've actually been doing that over the past few months in our local place plan work. So Frankie, can I just check your microphone's on? And
yep.
Pass on to you, mate. Okay.
Okay. So here we have an overview of the area that we're working in. You can see to the far left and the far right is bookended by the Gorbals and Govan. It's kind of also kind of sandwiched down between the Clyde and major motorway junctions coming off the M8. Can you next slide, please, Nicky? So the areas covered, the geographical and historical and socio-political context within the areas we're working is it was formerly a congruent set of neighbourhoods based on the economy of the Clyde. The construction of the M8 and the Kingston Bridge has created a decomposition and degradation of the quality of the neighbourhood spaces. The M8 and river, the M8 and the river equals the, what we would call Paisley Road West Corridor, which has been used as a major kind of rat run coming off the motorway. It's not well connected with Pollock Shields to the south of the neighbourhoods or north of the river. As I said before, it's bookended by complex motorway junctions, managing a considerable amount of industrial and commercial freight. The corridor in between Govan and the Gorbals is overlooked. The corridor in between Gorbals and Govan has actually been overlooked because the Gorbals and Govan has actually started to see quite a significant amount of regeneration. Deindustrialisation has equaled the decomposition and increase in vacant and derelict land, which we're seeing a lot of problems with things like fly tipping and stuff. Odd combinations of housing and newer industrial and commercial use. The area is dominated by car use, and because of the odd composition of traffic, can at times be very fast as drivers use the route as a shortcut, a cut through, as I just said, a rat run. Next slide, please, Nicky. The demographic, socio-political context in the SIMD is that we've got from the lowest percentile to the highest percentile within these 6 neighbourhoods, with pockets of affluence and quite extreme versions of inequality and marginalisation and poverty as well, all mixed together. So we're seeing that people have really mixed needs, and competition for resources is something that the perception amongst some people has been problematic for us. Next slide, please, Nicky. So the historical context is that deindustrialisation and post-industrial decline has created a lot of fragmentation among communities of place, identity and interest. This has created an overall decline in the cohesiveness of the communities. Next slide, please, Nicky. So the contemporary context is we have a lot of asylum seekers and refugees in our areas. So that's kind of been informed by the New Scots policy, which a lot of you will know is it's dependent on bridging and bonding capital, as well as social and cultural capital and political capital. A lot of these groups have got to travel out with the area to find this bridging and bonding capital. Brexit has also created a bit of a problem for us with an identity crisis among a distinct group within the area. There's a massive perceived competition over resources or lack of resources, and what one person can access within 20 minutes is dependent on many variables such as finances, time and mobility. Over to you, Nicky.
Well, as Frankie was saying there, we're dealing with geographically, it's a strangely constrained set of neighbourhoods. The river bounded on the north with the motorway on the south, and we've got 2 significant neighbourhoods that have had a lot of historical investment. A lot of recent investment and regeneration work. And we've got this set of neighbourhoods that's had to cope with post-industrial decline, had a big influx in new Scots, and it's created sometimes quite difficult internal dynamics between the communities that exist within the neighbourhoods. So it's quite ripe for a local place plan to try and re-establish a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose and identity, a sense of place in an area that, as Frankie said, is actually called locally the Paisley Road West Corridor. And I don't think anybody who lives there actually likes being told that they live in a corridor. Nobody wants to live in a corridor, they want to live in a place. So our approach to the local place plan is quite critical. We've taken the work of Nick Wright in the Scottish Community Development Centre to heart, and I think we've tried to develop that a little bit based on the context of our area as well. So it's an opportunity to flip the system and change what the experience of people in our local area is, that post-industrial decline, you know, decisions made by people in power, as well as the regeneration of the Clydeside and Glasgow in general over the past 30 years or so, is the top-down decision making that rolls over the top of people, and they feel very disempowered by this. It's an opportunity for us as community development workers to operationalise some policy, to do some much needed CLD work to raise consciousness within local populations about the historical and structural context that have led to their position and circumstances at the moment. And it's an opportunity for us to establish through these processes a model for local people leading on planning, not just their neighbourhoods, so not just urban development, if you like, but also locality planning. What services are there? What groups of identity and interest can we join, or what's missing? What do we need? And our aim through this local place plan is to set up a local system within the 6, it's actually 7 neighbourhoods if we include Pacific Quay, where the BBC and STV Science Centre, etc. is. A local area network, if you like, that can strategise going forward how the local neighbourhoods, how the local communities take shape for the next generation. Our approach is we're taking community-led as the watchword for a local place plan, local people leading. For us, that means it has to be facilitated and coordinated firstly, principally by professional CLD workers, who are then supported by local official agencies, and that work's enhanced by professionals according to what the local people identify as being their needs and their determinations. So in other words, what that means is, rather than, so when we started this process, we had a lot of planners and urban designers coming in to try and give us some lead and guidance. And we actually had to create some space there to say, no, first of all, we're going to speak to the local people. We're going to embed ourselves in these neighbourhoods and build up some knowledge about what the needs are before the planners come in and start dictating, if you like. We're now at a stage where we've got a number of projects taking off, and it's at this point we would bring in folk like planners, engineers, funding experts and so on, to try and to facilitate these projects further, to build up the local place plan. The second major watchword we use is neighbourhood, and this is different to place. We feel place we feel is a wee bit incoherent for local people, whereas neighbourhood is something far more tangible for them. It's a meaningful, coherent and accessible place and space for everyday activity. And we see the local place plan as being a blueprint, which is a set of, if you like, an A to Z of community action plans and other sort of major determinations and other quick wins that form a broad blueprint that can then be reviewed iteratively on an annual basis. As I said, we've taken an approach where we embed ourselves, practitioners in the neighbourhoods, and that's about building the knowledge for ourselves to try and form a strategy for the work ahead. We've taken that approach because we do not feel that consultations actually do justice. We don't think they're deep enough, long enough, involve as many voices as they ought to. And we also feel that quite often the asset-based community development approach can sometimes marginalise or even ignore certain voices within communities. So our approach is about storytelling and involving the histories, so the deindustrialisation and some of the traumas that's caused. It's quite important for people to be able to tell that story about their family, their history within the community, so that then when we talk about solutions going forward, they feel they've got a place and they've been listened to, and it's not just people coming in from the top and dictating yet again. The outcomes we're aiming for is the people within the Because We Say So communities, which are the 6 neighbourhoods that Frankie was talking about, will have published a blueprint, which will be the local place plan for how their communities and neighbourhoods will develop in the coming years. They'll have a local area network of groups, projects and organisations to formalise cross-neighbourhood, etc. Dialogue, resource sharing and decision making, and that through community learning and development work, they'll have the tools to assess needs and assets on a continual basis and have the resources to respond to changes within the neighbourhoods as they happen. And they'll have the tools to maintain and develop this blueprint and analyse things going forward. 20-minute neighbourhoods for us, as Ewan was saying, they were present in a number of manifestos, including, I think, Sustrans, Glasgow Disability Alliance, Shelter Scotland, and others. So when we were thinking about our approach to local place plan, we thought this was a key concept that we, through our initial kind of study in the area, there was no coherent sense of belonging or sense of place. So we felt that not only was there not a 20-minute neighbourhood in the imagination of the people who were living there, but that actually they were in between. They were very much in a no man's land in between Govan and Gorbals and the river and the motorway. So it's not a 20-minute neighbourhood at the moment. Place identity was lacking and sense of belonging, and we felt that we could bring this together through a 20-minute neighbourhood by focusing on a local kind of town centre based approach. And as Frankie was saying earlier, there's distinct issues of decomposition, disintegration, marginalisation that could perhaps be addressed through a shared problematisation approach, again based around the geographic centre. And Paisley Road West, albeit creating a corridor effect, is in fact perhaps the basis of a physical solution going forward. And in terms of policy, funding and other things, the area's proximity to the city centre and it's sitting in between the current locality plans in Gorbals and Govan mean that it's very often overlooked, and it's included in quite a number of the city development plan documents to show that people use the city centre. Well, actually, in our work, what we've discovered is that people don't like to use the city centre. They would far prefer to use local shops and services along Paisley Road West. They only use the city centre, in fact, because it's the only option available to them at the moment. 20-minute neighbourhoods offer a tangible scale for us, for people to reference their everyday activities. It's an opportunity to discuss the use and purpose of cars. As Frankie said, it's the traffic. The traffic isn't enormous in our area, but it can be very fast, and it can be very heavy in terms of its big trucks, because of the mixed industrial and residential sectors. There are large, it's large freight that's going through, and also people use it as a rat run, so it's fast traffic. And it gives us an opportunity to talk to people about why do you need cars to leave the area to use services. So it's a tangible concept in that respect. And this in turn invites conversations around sustainable and active travel, the climate crisis, as well as the quality and safety of the neighbourhood in terms of pollution, in terms of, in fact, noise pollution with the traffic is significant, and that causes a lot of stress, which has an impact on health and well-being, of course. Just to say the motorway itself is sometimes deafening, and we have, it really undermines the quality of green spaces in the area. And then it also introduces the dynamics of accessibility and ableism, which in our area is a significant factor. And as Ewan was talking about, why getting down to the brass tacks, if you like, of 20-minute neighbourhoods and definition. For us, the 20 minutes is actually a good scale, because if I can walk 20 minutes to get to somewhere, my neighbour might not be able to. And if we reduce that down to 10 minutes, then we might be overlooking the fact that some people actually need resting places as they're travelling between their house and whatever service they're getting to. Whereas 20 minutes, I think, is significant enough to be a challenge to some people. That means when we're looking at solutions for the quality of space and how accessible it is. We're actually looking at, well, we actually need stopping resting points, places for people to sit down and so on. I'm just going to pass back over to Frankie, because I think we're swallowing up a lot of time here.
So why 20-minute neighbourhoods? 20-minute neighbourhoods allow us to conceptualise multi-demographical or non-segregational places and spaces.
Frankie, sorry mate, sorry, beg your pardon, Frankie. I was just going to
move on to the next slide.
I'll just pass back on to you. Aye.
So how we are using the 20-minute neighbourhood concept? We use this concept to frame a number of questions to local people, e.g. what services do you need to leave the neighbourhood for and why? How do you move around your neighbourhood and why? Can you access good quality X, Y, Z within a short journey from your home? We took part in the Sustaining Choices programme in collaboration with Planning Aid Scotland, using the Place Standard tool. 20-minute neighbourhood was used to frame the questions around where we focused on sustainable and active travel and accessible neighbourhoods. One of the key points for action that came out of one of the sessions was to use COP26 as leverage to increase active travel by making safer spaces for walking and wheeling and cycling and accessibility on an environmental basis to lower emissions within the LPP or local place plan localities. Next slide, please, Nikki. So how we are using the 20-minute neighbourhood concept. So weekly we are walking, wheeling and mapping as we go with local community members. What we're doing there is problematising and visualising the hyper-local neighbourhood as we move around it. We're using this concept to build a conversation on priorities for action. We're using the storytelling method and knowledge sharing is quite key to our approach. Local volunteers are now taking a leading role in mapping and data gathering. As CLD workers are informed by the communities and trusted to broker connections and support at a local authority level. Trusted to facilitate development, e.g. we've developed Friends of Festival Park, Kingston DIY. Friends of Festival Park are taking responsibility for the planning and decision making of a local park, which is now having development encroaching on it, which significantly could increase the chances of gentrification. Kingston DIY are a local skate group who are actually self-developing and self-building a skate park. So other methods we've used is brainstorming sessions. As we said earlier, we feel like consultation fatigue is a massive issue for community engagement. So brainstorming sessions we've used have been interactive, they've been fun, and we've give people the opportunity to use different methods that obviously think outside the box, and they're actually very engaging and fun to be involved in. So that allows the groups to set their own priorities for action as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, right, apologies for the kind of the nervousness there. We threw this together at the very last minute, and I think we didn't get a chance to run through it, so we didn't realise it would go on so long as well. But thanks very much for your patience. I'll stop sharing the screen now.
Thanks very much, Nikki and Frankie, and don't worry, I appreciate you're either on holiday or just back from your holiday, so totally appreciate the fact that you've actually been willing to participate in today. And your project, I noticed Margaret in the chat was saying, this is a really good example because you're looking at from a local place plan perspective, so you're early on in the use of what is a new part of the planning system, arguably. And also I think your particular area that you're covering is interesting because of that fragmentation that you've both talked about, and that you're between two areas that have been the beneficiaries of regeneration and are actually, I suppose, Govan and the Gorbals are very strong brands, and you sit between them, and the corridor concept is, I would agree, is not something we want to live in a corridor. And I also think your point there about the public understanding neighbourhoods over place is spot on. Professionals understand place. And I don't know if anybody watched the parliamentary debate on the place principle, but it was hysterical because the parliamentarians, the MSPs, they really mocked the definition of the place principle in that debate because they were mocking, I think, the professional jargon that has arisen around the place principle. While still respecting what the place principle is attempting to do, they were kind of, from a lay perspective, making a point, which neighbourhood, I think they definitely would understand, as most people understand, even if they couldn't fully articulate it or write it down, they understand what their neighbourhood is. Do we have any questions from anybody for our speakers, either on the background research, the local concept, or the local authority perspective? John, Howie, do you want to unmute and ask a question, seeing as you put your hand up first?
No, thank you very much, Ewan. I mean, it's an excellent start to the network, and thank you very much to all the speakers. Frankie and Nikki, I was parked up in Paisley Road West a couple of weeks ago, so it was great to hear some stories in terms of the backdrop of how it's emerged as it has, and the fantastic plans you've got in place for taking that work forward. Daisy and I have also just connected in the chat, and we're going to be meeting up very soon. But my question was, and I suppose it's probably a plea to Rebecca. Rebecca, I mean, that's an excellent piece of work that's been carried out, and I think it's great to see how Scotland sits as a 20-minute neighbourhood place across the different localities. I was interested in Ramboll's definition of a 20-minute neighbourhood, because it is in effect the 14 dimensions of the place standard tool, which I think is excellent, because then we've got a consistency of definition between place and 20-minute neighbourhoods. But I think it'd be really helpful if this is going to be getting showcased as a definition to make that link explicit, because one of the things that you do mention is about how we practically roll this out. And in effect, the place standard tool is there. There are different definitions, and it is accessible and free, and being used across Scotland for the last 5 years, and also across Europe and across other regions in the world as well. So it was just a plea, if the presentation is being made, just to say, look, guys, if you want to put this into practice and you agree with our definition, here's the place standard tool to go to, and you can just download it or log on and start using the thing. And that was my main point. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I might just quickly respond and say, yeah, totally agree. And that's why we built our definition on that really good work that had been done. We were speaking to the Scottish Improvement Service and partners across Scottish Government and across lots of different departments. And I think, as you said, John, that the work is there, the thinking's there, the categories there. I've spoken to people in Australia who are looking at the place principle. My colleagues in Finland are asking us to talk about the place principle that Scotland's used. And yeah, I think it is just about operationalizing that. And I know, again, that's jargon, but the thinking's there, the 14 categories are there, they're built on outcomes that, they're built on a kind of cross-disciplinary approach. And I totally agree, it's maybe about, if it's framed with a neighborhood, or the jargon is kind of directed people to using this tool, but it's for a neighborhood approach. Yeah, agree.
I mean, it has been used. I mean, it's been used at a neighbourhood level across so many countries. In fact, Denmark have just finished the report in 6 areas. So that was one of the big challenges, was transferring that jargon into something that anyone could use. So yeah, if you could promote that'd be brilliant. Thank you.
One of the questions that's coming through the chat, and I'll be interested if anyone has the answer to this, but it's definitely a challenge because it's come up in our survey responses, is from John Maslin, is how do we square off the asset consolidation and efficiency saving agenda with the need to retain localised services? And this is something we see playing out actually in real time, I suppose, actually in Glasgow currently. But Daisy, you put your hand up there. How do you think we can respond to that?
I just think, I mean, that's $1 million question, isn't it? It's a difficult one, especially now with being recently, I mean, I'm quite new to local government, but obviously the tensions around budgets and all of those questions that come up. It's a huge focus of our attention right now, especially as we talk about Minute Neighbourhoods. I think for me, it's about ensuring that we know collectively what our outcomes are. What is it that we want to see happen? And then there will be many difficult conversations internally to get to that point, but not losing sight of what it is that we want to see happen in that place will help us then to prioritize what we do to make that happen. So yeah, it's not easy at all, and many difficult conversations happening now, and will continue to happen over the next year or so as this starts to take shape and crystallize into a program of work. But yeah, it's not easy. I saw the question come up and I thought, yeah, it's a difficult one.
I don't know if anyone else has any comment on that. I suppose in some of the other reading around this, the concept needs long-term investment within it. And I suppose it comes back to that permanent budgeting dilemma of budgets being set on an annual basis and outcomes actually taking years to see. And so when we're saying that you need to keep a service open locally because there is a very long-term cost saving, it's making sure that those who are setting the budgets can accept that and hold on to the concept that this will deliver something. And I suppose it means that it does require evidence of the different outcomes that can be made if you have long-term financial commitment to keeping a service open. Does anybody else have any other questions for any of our speakers? Nikki, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just something that's come up a few times is, and I think this is probably specific to the local place plan, but I think the local place plan is one of the places where 20-minute neighbourhoods can be operationalised. It's one of the ways that can be done. But one of the main things that's been coming up is how do local people, if they're leading on determining what a 20-minute neighbourhood looks like for them, which is, I think, distinctly different to how it might be rationalised from the planning department and so on. But how do we put these two determinations or these two analyses into dialogue properly? And what would be the process for that, or what ought to be the process for that, really?
In Edinburgh, what we're doing is pulling together. So we had one workshop which we call Joining the Dots, which does exactly what it's meant to do, is trying to start to join the dots. And it was starting to bring what is the role of the council in this? What is the role of how do we embed ourselves with the amazing work that you're doing, for example, in Glasgow, the communities doing that over here, for example. So I think for me, the first step is mapping out what is going on where, and then making sure that everyone's clear about what, finding a shared language. I think that was the first thing that came out, that there needs to be clarity around what language we use. What does a 20-minute neighborhood actually mean? What does a community anchor mean? What does an anchor organization mean? So taking some of the jargon out of it, and then starting to establish jointly what outcomes you want to see. We had a workshop in Portobello, for example, where we got different community groups together, and it wasn't the council fronting that. It was very much EVOC, Scottish Futures Trust. They chaired it, and it's really interesting the kind of nuances in the conversation that comes up when you talk about what people's aspirations are for a place. Very different to what a planner would think, or what I would think in a transport team, for example. So it's about listening and genuinely listening, and here is an opportunity to do that. I think last year a lot of investment has gone in. I think you only mentioned Spaces for People, which has done wonders in many respects, but in other respects, there is a chance now to pause and reflect and build on some of the positives of that, but also step back and see how can we make things better. So sorry, I don't know if I quite answered your question, but it's about listening, and for me, and joining those dots, seeing what new partnerships we can build.
Okay, thanks very much, Daisy. We've got another couple of hands up. Davina Lavery, can I take you, and then Michael Ward?
Yeah, mine was one that I'd put in the chat, and I'm a bit confused over 20-minute neighbourhoods in terms of the map that Rebecca showed and what Nikki had mentioned. We have just done some consultation with people in Alexandria, which is in Western Bartonshire near Balloch. And we're trying to encourage them to just be a lot more active and think about how they could get into the town centre by walking, cycling, etc. And one of the responses that we got back is that most people said they aren't confident or have the ability to walk for 20 minutes. And one of the understandings that I had picked up from reading a lot of the 20-minute neighbourhood stuff was that 20 minutes is the return journey from the service that people are wanting to use from their home. And I just wanted to check with Rebecca's map, like the shaded in map, is that the correct understanding that I should be looking at when we're looking at other areas in Western Bartonshire or elsewhere in Scotland? Or is it a 20-minute journey, not like in total, is it 20 minutes from the home to the service or facility or school that people are going to? So it's really just to get some clarification on that.
Yeah, sure. So we used 800 meters from somebody's home out, which obviously is a different distance for everybody. But yes, it should be 10 minutes there and 10 minutes back is what we were looking at. So 800 meters is the distance. And I guess, again, it comes down to this: 800 meters for some people is not a 10 minutes walk or wheel, or that is a 20-minute journey. But we use the distance of 800 meters, which we saw as 10 minutes there and 10 minutes back. I hope that, clarifies. Yeah. Again, to add to that, when we did our study, because it was such a large area and quite a quick piece of work, we just looked at an 800 meter circle on a map. Ideally, what we'd be looking at is a network. So actually, I think the important thing is, just because something is 800 meters away from your home doesn't necessarily mean that that journey is doable. You might come across a motorway or a railway network or a river, as Nikki's looking at in Glasgow, and that actually when you're looking at places, it's about the quality of that journey, and that people can actually do that journey in 10 minutes out and 10 minutes back without issues of severance as well. So I guess just, our mapping couldn't look at it in that granular detail, but on a local area, it's really important to look at those issues of severance as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful, because that's the sort of comments we've got back from the community consultation, that a lot of people, if they're going along an unlit path that is maybe they're frightened to go along it, they feel intimidated, especially in the winter. So it's about that quality of experience that leads to the overall setting of the place and the quality of the town or the 20-minute neighbourhood. So that's really helpful. Thank you. And I'd just like to say, yeah, it's really good to have this. One of our next, I work in a very small local authority, so we don't have the luxury, like there's only 2 people in the team that I work in, the regeneration team. So we don't have the luxury of the big local authorities like Glasgow and Edinburgh. So to have this platform to bounce off ideas and things is so beneficial. So look forward to being involved in this going forward.
Thanks very much, Davina. That's great to hear. That's what we want the network to be for. Michael, you had a question.
Yeah, it was just, I suppose, to respond to a point that Nikki raised. From Glasgow City Council. I'm not sure I would describe that as being a luxury position at the moment, in terms of Davina's point, but because one of the issues that we have, and we will have going forward in terms of resources, is how we support local place plans, particularly in a big city where there's potentially, if you look at the guidance that Scottish Government producing, we could potentially be looking at hundreds of local place plans emerging in Glasgow, depending on how you define what a local place is. And there is quite a significant expectation that local authorities will support the delivery of these. And I go back to when I started with the council in 20 years, where we were very much embedded as area planners. So you did know the local community, you knew all the local groups and players, and we just don't have that anymore because resources have been cut so significantly. So there is a huge challenge there going forward as to how we support that. As a council, what we're looking to do over the next year is produce guidance on local place plans. So kind of part, I suppose, the pioneers in Glasgow for us, and it'll be interesting. We've obviously already met with Nikki to discuss how that sits with our kind of wider plan for that part of the city as well. And I think that's been a really positive conversation. But there is a huge challenge there, because other communities perhaps are not in the fortunate position that Canning Park are in now, having Nikki and Frankie as those community development workers that are going to be embedded in the place. The community, the local place plan might be very different from other areas. So how do we embed all of these in our development plan going forward? I think it's going to be a huge challenge, and that's part of the consultation that's going on just now. I think the biggest issue for us, and the elephant in the room, I suppose, is resources. I know Daisy mentioned £500,000 really in terms of that list of projects. £500,000 doesn't deliver a lot. So how does it leave it in other funding and all these challenges? But I think the resource issue is huge for us. And you'll see in the press in Glasgow at the moment that we are potentially still have almost half of our Glasgow Life facilities closed, which are critical to 20-minute neighbourhoods. So how do we work against that backdrop? So I think for me, I suppose one of the key issues going forward for this group to look at is resources, how you deliver 20-minute neighbourhoods, how you deliver local place plans. Because that is a massive challenge for us. Anything that we post as a council just now, the first thing that's posted under it is clean the city, pick up the litter. And again, I think these are things that are very important to be able to feel safe and walk about in your neighbourhood. But the council simply doesn't have the same resource that it used to do these things. So I think resources is probably, for me, the biggest thing that we need to talk about going forward.
Thanks very much, Michael. I think that also reflects one of the things I didn't include in what you had all said was, I think it was one person was managing expectations because of the lack of resource. I think Michael's picked up on a really trenchant point that this is going to be a major issue. I mean, obviously the government have done some analysis on what the cost of local place plans could be. RTPI have also looked at it. It's between £10,000 and £30,000, and how possible that's going to be to deliver. But the bigger question to me is who actually gets the funding to do that, and making sure that it's communities that actually need change that maybe make it. It's 11:29. We're due to finish at 11:30. Alistair, I'll take your question. We may not have time for an answer.
Ewan, hi. No, it was really just a bit of information. I've been involved in trying to work out the distances for place plans. And one of the problems with using the home as the base is it's constantly changing. The person on the next street is a different journey. So that very often takes you to a point where you've got to try and agree as a community where the anchor point is, be it, let's say, the primary school, which is a very, very kind of obvious one, or this bus stop, the shops. And I think when you come to do it, that's one of the major things that you'll find your debate will revolve around. Because within a community, everyone's got a different view of what's the key facility. And if you're designing a new community, it's really easy because you can put them all together. But once you get existing, particularly peripheral schemes that were designed in the 80s, 90s, 80s, 90s, you find community facilities are spread absolutely throughout them. So it starts to engender a debate of also coalescing these facilities into some kind of central point. And I don't want to lose the point, but I thought it was worth making. Yeah.
No, that's great. Thanks very much, Alistair. It would be lovely if we had more time. People are already dropping out to other meetings, as I can see. After this meeting today, we'll be sharing content from the meeting. We'll be sharing links to other things. And what we'll ultimately be doing is using our website, a web page on our website as a devoted page to 20-minute neighbourhoods, where any new research, any policy, new policy information that comes out will go on that. So if you come across anything and you don't see it on our website, not today because there's not much on it, but in a couple of weeks' time, let us know so that we can then make it available, and we will continue to keep the network updated as to what's happening. We'll have another event scheduled for September, but after today we'll be asking what more you want out of it for future topics for discussion. I have some that I think we need to discuss. The rural dimension, we've not really touched on that today, and I think we do need to look at what rural hubs look like. NPF4, it's going to be in NPF4. Is it going to be good enough? It goes to Parliament for consultation. Who lobbies? Somebody's mentioned the fact that there'll be strong resistance to this from some sectors. Who lobbies for the concept? You, us. How we do that when that goes into Parliament, I'll be interested to explore that. Hearing from the Scottish Futures Trust, major funder, major player in where services are cited. Public Health Scotland, you'll probably be aware, have done some work on this with the local improvement, with the improvement service, and there's some documents that we'll share with them, and they are about to announce 4 sites where they're running a project, which 20-minute neighbourhood will be fundamental to that, and funding is the other one that I would suggest. But we'll be asking you what you think we should be discussing at our next in September. But I would like to thank our speakers, Rebecca and Daisy, Nikki, 4 speakers, Rebecca, Daisy, Nikki and Frankie. Thank you very much for the time that you've given today. But just briefly, I'm going to hand over to Emma for a surf advert.
Yes, I'll just be very quick just before you go. Just quickly share my screen. Share. Oh, it's been a bit funny. And slideshow from the beginning. Okay, so just a couple of quick adverts just for some other surf work that might be of interest to some of you. The Surf Awards, which is our annual award scheme, there are some winners on here, including Michael Ward, who asked the question for the Glasgow Barras. They opened on the 3rd of June. They closed for applications at 5 PM on Monday, the 6th of September. So still quite a wee bit of time to get an application in. The 5 categories are there: community-led regeneration, supporting youth employability, Scotland's most improved place, housing and regeneration, and creative regeneration. All of the information is on the website, just in the link there, but I can send round some information when I send up some follow-up after this. Next is just a wee bit on surf membership. A lot of you are surf members, so your organisations. If you're not, it's £50 for an organisation and £20 for an individual or community group. It's a free way to promote your activities. You can get involved in some of our policy consultation, and you get advance notice and advance booking on kind of general wider surf network events. Again, there's some information and I can send something round. And just lastly, some other events out with the 20-minute neighbourhood network that we've got coming up. We, as part of the Surf Awards, we do some shared learning workshops. 3 of them have already happened, and there is recordings on our website of those on our YouTube page. The final one is this Thursday, and it's on embedding artistic approaches to enable communities to become agents for change. It features the 3 shortlisted projects in the 2020 awards under the creative regeneration category. 2 of them are from Govan, and the other one is TuneSpeak, who works on kind of wider Glasgow basis, and we'll also hear from Creative Scotland. Our annual conference is open for bookings, so there's 3 sessions on that on the 24th to the 26th of August. They're just an hour and a half each, and they are, the overarching theme is partners in place, but they cover post-COVID recovery, place-based regeneration, and they cover climate change. And lastly is the Surf Award dinner, which we're hoping will be a physical event. That will be nice, on the 9th of December in Glasgow, but more details will follow on that. But everything's on the Surfer website under the events section. And that's me, Ewan.
Thank you very much, Emma, and hopefully as this network continues, we will all get to meet physically in a real space and do some workshop together, and use post-it notes and, I was going to say, touch things, not necessarily each other. It's still, but yes, but thank you very much again to our speakers. Thank you very much to those who contributed questions and to those who put stuff in the chat. Apologies if I didn't get to your question. Some of the content in the chat is also really helpful. We will gather as many of the links that people have shared as possible, and make sure that that's shared in the feedback that we send you after this event. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your holiday, Nikki, and everybody have a very good week.